Requiem. Lena. I've started dreaming of Portland again. Since Alex reappeared, resurrected but also changed, twisted, like a monster from one of the ghost stories we used to tell as kids, the past has been finding its way in. It bubbles up through the cracks when I'm not paying attention, and pulls at me with greedy fingers. This is what they warned me about for all those years, the heavy weight in my chest, the nightmare fragments that follow me even in waking life. I warn you, Aunt Carol says in my head. We told you, Rachel says. You should have stayed. That's Hana reaching out across an expanse of time, through the murky thick layers of memory, stretching a weightless hand to me as I am sinking. About 24 of us came north from New York City: Raven, Tack, Julian and me, and also Danny Gordo, and Pike, plus 15 or so others who are largely content to stay quiet and follow directions. And Alex. But not my Alex, a stranger who never smiles, doesn't laugh, and barely speaks. The others, those who were using the warehouse outside White Plains as a homestead, scattered south or west. By now, the warehouse has no doubt been totally stripped and abandoned. It isn't safe, not after Julian's rescue. Julian Feynman is a symbol, and an important one. The zombies will hunt for him. They will want to string the symbol up, and make it bleed meaning, so that others will learn their lesson. We have to be extra careful. Hunter, Bram, Lou, and some of the other members of the old Rochester homestead are waiting for us just south of Poughkeepsie. It takes us nearly 3 days to cover the distance. We are forced to circumnavigate a half-dozen valid cities. Then abruptly we arrive. The woods simply run out at the edge of an enormous expanse of concrete, webbed with thick fissures and still marked very faintly with the ghostly white outlines of parking spaces. Cars rusted, picked clean of various parts, rubber tires, bits of metal still sit in the lot. They look small and faintly ridiculous, like ancient toys left out by a child. The old parking lot flows like gray water in all directions, running up at last against a vast structure of steel and glass, an old shopping mall. A sign in looping cursive script, streaked white with bird shit, reads Empire State Plaza Mall. The reunion is joyful. Tack, Raven and I break into a run. Bram and Hunter are running too, and we intercept them in the middle of the parking lot. I jump on Hunter, laughing, and he throws his arms around me and lifts me off my feet. Everyone is shouting and talking at once. Hunter sets me down finally, but I keep one arm locked around him, as though he might disappear. I reach out and wrap my other arm around Bram, who is shaking hands with Tack, and somehow we all end up piled together, jumping and shouting, our bodies interlaced in the middle of the brilliant sunshine. Well. We break apart, turn around and see Lou sauntering toward us. Her eyebrows are raised. She has let her hair grow long, and brushed it forward, so it pulls over her shoulders. Look what the cat dragged in. It's the first time I felt truly happy in days. The short months we have spent apart have changed both Hunter and Bram. Bram is against all odds, heavier. Hunter has new wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, although his smile is as boyish as ever. How's Sarah? I say. Is she here? Sarah stayed in Maryland, Hunter says. The homestead is 30 strong, and she won't have to migrate. The resistance is trying to get word to her sister. What about Grandpa and the others? I am breathless, and there is a tight feeling in my chest, as though I am still being squeezed. Bram and Hunter exchange a small glance. Grandpa didn't make it, Hunter says shortly. We buried him outside Baltimore. Raven looks away, spits on the pavement. Bram adds quickly, the others are fine. He reaches out and places a finger on my procedural scar, the one he helped me fake to initiate me into the resistance. Looking good, he says and winks. We decide to camp for the night. There's clean water a short distance from the old mall and a wreckage of old houses and business offices that have yielded some usable supplies, a few cans of food still buried in the rubble. Rusted tools. Even a rifle, which Hunter found still cradled in a pair of upturned deer hooves, under a mound of collapsed plaster. And one member of our group, Henley, a short, quiet woman with a long coil of gray hair, is running a fever. This will give her time to rest. By the end of the day an argument breaks out about where to go. We could split up, Raven says. She is squatting by the pit she has cleared for the fire, stoking the first, glowing splinters of flame with the charred end of a stick. The larger our group, the safer we are, Tack argues. He has pulled off his fleece and is wearing only a t-shirt, so the ropey muscles of his arms are visible. The days have been warming slowly, and the woods have been coming to life. We can feel the spring coming, like an animal stirring lightly in its sleep, exhaling hot breath. But it's cold now, when the sun is low and the wilds are swallowed by long purple shadows when we are no longer moving. The nights are still wintry. Lena Craven barks out. I start. I've been staring at the beginnings of the fire, watching flame curl around the mass of pine needles, twigs, and brittle leaves. Go check on the tents, okay? It'll be dark soon. Raven has built the fire in a shallow gully that must once have been a stream, where it will be somewhat sheltered from the wind. She has avoided setting up camp too close to the mall and its haunted spaces. It looms above the tree line, all twisted black metal and empty eyes like an alien spaceship run aground. Up the embankment a dozen yards, Julian is helping set up the tents. He has his back to me. He too is wearing only a t-shirt. Just 3 days in the wilds have already changed him. His hair is tangled, and a leaf is caught just behind his left ear. He looks skinnier although he has not had time to lose weight. This is just the effect of being here in the open, with salvaged too big clothing surrounded by savage wilderness, a perpetual reminder of the fragility of our survival. He is securing a rope to a tree, yanking it taut. Our tents are old and have been torn and patched repeatedly. They don't stand on their own. They must be propped up and strung between trees and coaxed to life, like sails in the wind. Gordo is hovering next to Julian, watching approvingly. Do you need any help? I pause a few feet away. Julian and Gordo turn around. Lena. Julian's face lights up then immediately falls again as he realizes I don't intend to come closer. I brought him here, with me to this strange new place, and now I have nothing to give him. We're okay, Gordo says. His hair is bright red, and even though he's no older than Tak, he has a beard that grows to the middle of his chest. Just finishing up. Julian straightens up and wipes his palms on the back of his jeans. He hesitates, then comes down the embankment toward me, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear. It's cold, he says when he's a few feet away. You should go down to the fire. I'm all right, I say, but I put my hands into the arms of my windbreaker. The cold is inside me. Sitting next to the fire won't help. The tents look good. Thanks. I think I'm getting the hang of it. His smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. 3 days of strained conversation and silence. I know he is wondering what has changed and whether it can be changed back. I know I'm hurting him. There are questions he is forcing himself not to ask, and things he is struggling not to say. He is giving me time. He is patient and gentle. You look pretty in this light, he says. You must be going blind. I intend it as a joke, but my voice sounds harsh in the thin air. Julian shakes his head, frowning, and looks away. The leaf, a vivid yellow, is still tangled in his hair behind his ear. In that moment, I'm desperate to reach out to remove it, and run my fingers through his hair and laugh with him about it. This is the wilds, I'll say. Did you ever imagine? And he'll lace his fingers through mine and squeeze. He'll say, what would I do without you? But I can't bring myself to move. You have a leaf in your hair. A what? Julian looks startled, as though I've recalled him from a dream. A leaf. In your hair. Julian runs a hand impatiently through his hair. Lena thigh. Bang. The sound of a rifle shot makes us both jump. Birds start out of the trees behind Julian, temporarily darkening the sky all at once before dispersing into individual shapes. Someone says damn. Danny and Alex emerge from the trees beyond the tents. Both of them have rifles slung across their shoulders. Gordo straightens up. Dear? He asks. The light is nearly all gone. Alex's hair looks almost black. Too big for a deer, Danny says. She is a large woman, broad across the shoulders with a wide, flat forehead and almond eyes. She reminds me of Miyako, who died before we went south last winter. We burned her on a frigid day just before the first snow. Bear? Gordo asks. Might have been, Danny replies shortly. Danny is harder edged than Miyako was, she has let the wilds whittle her down, carve her to steel. Did you hit it? I ask too eager, though I already know the answer. But I am willing Alex to look at me, to speak to me. Might have just clipped it, Danny says. Hard to tell. Not enough to stop it though. Alex says nothing doesn't register my presence even. He keeps walking, threading his way through the tents, past Julian and me, close enough that I imagine I can smell him, the old smell of grass and sun-dried wood, a Portland smell that makes me want to cry out and bury my face in his chest and inhale. Then he is heading down the embankment as Raven's voice floats up to us, dinner's on. Eat up or miss out. Come on. Julian grazes my elbow with his fingertips. Gentle patient. My feet turn me and move me down the embankment toward the fire, which is now burning hot and strong. Toward the boy who becomes shadow standing next to it, blotted out by the smoke. That is what Alex is now, a shadow boy in illusion. For 3 days he has not spoken to me or looked at me at all. Hana. Want to know my deep, dark secret? In Sunday school, I used to cheat on the quizzes. I could never get into the book of SHHH, not even as a kid. The only section of the book that interested me at all was Legends and Grievances, which is full of folk tales about the world before the cure. My favorite story, the story of Solomon, goes like this. Once upon a time, during the days of sickness, 2 women and an infant went before the king. Each woman claimed that the infant was hers. Both refused to give the child to the other woman and pleaded their cases passionately, each claiming that she would die of grief if the baby were not returned solely to her possession. The king, whose name was Solomon, listened to both their speeches and at last announced that he had a fair solution. "We will cut the baby in two," he said, "and that way each of you will have a portion." The women agreed that this was just, and so the executioner was brought forward, and with his axe he sliced the baby cleanly in two. And the baby never cried, or so much as made a sound, and the mothers looked on, and afterward for 1,000 years, there was a spot of blood on the palace floor that could never be cleaned or diluted by any substance on earth. I must have been only 8 or 9 when I read that passage for the first time, but it really struck me. For days I couldn't get the image of that poor baby out of my head. I kept picturing it split open on the tile floor, like a butterfly pinned behind glass. That's what's so great about the story. It's real. What I mean is, even if it didn't actually happen and there's debate about the legends and grievances section, and whether it's historically accurate, it shows the world truthfully. I remember feeling just like that baby, torn apart by feeling, split in two, caught between loyalties and desires. That's how the diseased world is. That's how it was for me, before I was cured. In exactly 21 days, I'll be married. My mother looks as though she might cry, and I almost hope that she will. I've seen her cry twice in my life, once when she broke her ankle and once last year when she came outside and found that protesters had climbed the gate and torn up our lawn and pried her beautiful car into pieces. In the end she says only, "You look lovely, Hana." And then it's a little too big in the waist though. "Mrs. Killigan, call me Anne," she simpered. The first time we came for a fitting, circles me quietly, pinning and adjusting. She is tall with faded blonde hair and a pinched look, as though over the years she has accidentally ingested various pins and sewing needles. "You're sure you want to go with the cap sleeves?" "I'm sure," I say, just as my mom says, "You think they look too young?" Mrs. Killigan Anne gestures expressively with one long, bony hand. "The whole city will be watching," she says. "The whole country," my mother corrects her. "I like the sleeves," I say, and I almost add, "It's my wedding." But that isn't true anymore, not since the incidents in January, and Mayor Hargrove's death. My wedding belongs to the people now. That's what everybody has been telling me for weeks. Yesterday we got a phone call from the National News Service, asking whether they could syndicate footage, or send in their own television crew to film the ceremony. Now, more than ever, the country needs its symbols. We are standing in front of a 3-sided mirror. My mother's frown is reflected from 3 different angles. "Mrs. Killigan's right," she says, touching my elbow. "Let's see how it looks at 3/4, okay?" I know better than to argue. 3 reflections nod simultaneously. 3 identical girls with identical ropes of braided blonde and 3 identical white, floor-skimming dresses. Already, I hardly recognize myself. I've been transfigured by the dress, by the bright lights in the dressing room. For all my life I have been Hannah Tate. But the girl in the mirror is not Hannah Tate. She is Hannah Hargrove, soon-to-be wife of the soon-to-be mayor, and a symbol of all that is right about the cured world. A path and a road for everyone. "Let me see what I have in the back," Mrs. Killigan says. "We'll slip you into a different style, just so you'll have a comparison." She slides across the worn gray carpet and disappears into the storeroom. Through the open door, I see dozens of dresses sheathed in plastic, dangling limply from garment racks. My mother sighs. "We've been here for 2 hours already, and I'm starting to feel like a scarecrow, stuffed and poked and stitched." My mother sits on a faded footstool next to the mirrors, holding her purse primly in her lap so it won't touch the carpet. Mrs. Killigan's has always been the nicest wedding shop in Portland, but it, too, has clearly felt the lingering effects of the incidents and the security crackdowns the government implemented in their aftermath. Money is tighter for practically everybody, and it shows. One of the overhead bulbs is out, and the shop has a musty smell, as though it has not been cleaned recently. On one wall, a pattern of moisture has begun bubbling the wallpaper, and earlier I noticed a large brown stain on one of the striped settees. Mrs. Killigan caught me looking and casually tossed a shawl down to conceal it. "You really do look lovely, Hannah," my mother says. "Thank you," I say. "I know I look lovely. It might sound egotistical, but it's the truth. This too has changed since my cure. When I was uncured, even though people always told me I was pretty, I never felt it. But after the cure, a wall came down inside me. Now I see that yes, I am quite simply and inarguably beautiful. I also no longer care." Here we are. Mrs. Killigan reemerges from the back, holding several plastic suede gowns over her arm. I swallow a sigh, but not quickly enough. Mrs. Killigan places a hand on my arm. "Don't worry, dear," she says. "We'll find the perfect dress. That's what this is all about, isn't it?" I arrange my face into a smile, and the pretty girl in the mirror arranges her face with me. "Of course," I say. "Perfect dress. Perfect match. A perfect lifetime of happiness. Perfection is a promise, and a reassurance that we are not wrong. Mrs. Killigan's shop is in Old Port, and as we emerge onto the street I inhale the familiar scents of dried seaweed and old wood. The day is bright, but the wind is cold off the bay. Only a few boats are bobbing in the water, mostly fishing vessels or commercial rigs. From a distance, the scat-splattered wood moorings look like reeds growing out of the water. The street is empty except for 2 regulators and Tony, our bodyguard. My parents decided to employ security services just after the incidents when Fred Hargrove's father, the mayor, was killed, and it was decided that I should leave college and get married as soon as possible. Now Tony comes everywhere with us. On his days off, he sends his brother, Rick, as a substitute. It took me a month to be able to distinguish between them. They both have thick, short necks and shiny bald heads. Neither of them speaks much, and when they do, they never have anything interesting to say. That was one of my biggest fears about the cure, that the procedure would switch me off somehow and inhibit my ability to think. But it's the opposite. I think more clearly now. In some ways, I even feel things more clearly. I used to feel with a kind of feverishness. I was filled with panic and anxiety and competing desires. There were nights I could hardly sleep, days when I felt like my insides were trying to crawl out of my throat. I was infected. Now the infection has gone. Tony has been leaning against the car. I wonder if he has been standing in that position for all 3 hours we've been in Mrs. Killigan's. He straightens up as we approach, and opens the door for my mother. "Thank you, Tony," she says. "Was there any trouble?" "No, ma'am." "Good." She gets into the back seat, and I slide in after her. We've had this car for only 2 months, a replacement for the one that was vandalized, and just a few days after it arrived, my mom came out of the grocery store to find that someone had keyed the word pig into the paint. Secretly, I think that my mom's real motivation for hiring Tony was a desire to protect the new car. After Tony shuts the door, the world outside the tinted windows gets tinged a dark blue. He turns the radio to the NNS, the national news source. The commentators' voices are familiar and reassuring. I lean my head back and watch the world begin to move. I have lived in Portland all my life, and have memories of almost every street and every corner. But these two seem distant now, safely submerged in the past. A lifetime ago I used to sit on those picnic benches with Lena, luring seagulls with breadcrumbs. We talked about flying. We talked about escape. It was kid stuff, make-believe talk, like believing in unicorns and magic. I never thought she would actually do it. My stomach cramps. I realize I haven't eaten since breakfast. I must be hungry. Busy week, my mother says. Yeah. And don't forget, the Post wants to interview you this afternoon. I haven't forgotten. Now we just need to find you a dress for Fred's inauguration, and we'll be all set. Or did you decide to go with the yellow one we saw in Lava last week? I'm not sure yet, I say. What do you mean, you're not sure? The inauguration's in 5 days, Hana. Everyone will be looking at you. The yellow one, then. Of course, I have no idea what I'll wear. We've passed into the West End, our old neighborhood. Historically, the West End has been home to many of the higher-ups in the church and the medical field, priests of the Church of the New Order, government officials, doctors and researchers at the labs. That's no doubt why it was targeted so heavily during the riots following the incidents. The riots were quelled quickly. There's still much debate about whether the riots represented an actual movement or whether they were a result of misdirected anger and the passions we're trying so hard to eradicate. Still, many families felt that the West End was too close to downtown, too close to some of the more troubled neighborhoods where many of the sympathizers and resistors are concealed. Many families, like ours, have moved off peninsula now. Don't forget, Hana, we're supposed to speak with the caterers on Monday. I know. We take Danforth to Vaughan, our old street. I lean forward slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of our old house, but the Andersons' evergreen conceals it almost entirely from view, and all I get is a flash of the green gabled roof. Our house, like the Andersons beside it, and the Richards opposite, is empty and will probably remain so. Still, we see not a single for sale sign. No one can afford to buy. Fred says that the economic freeze will remain in place for at least a few years, until things begin to stabilize. For now, the government needs to reassert control. People need to be reminded of their place. I wonder if the mice are already finding their way into my old room, leaving droppings on the polished wood floors, and whether spiders have started webbing up the corners. Soon the house will look like 37 Brooks, barren, almost chewed looking, collapsing slowly from termite rot. Another change, I can think about 37 Brooks now, and Lena, and Alex, without the old strangled feeling. And I'll bet you never reviewed the guest list I left in your room. I haven't had time, I say absently, keeping my eyes on the landscape skating by our window. We maneuver onto Congress, and the neighborhood changes quickly. Soon we pass one of Portland's 2 gas stations around which a group of regulators stands guard, guns pointing toward the sky. Then dollar stores and a laundromat with a faded orange awning. A dingy-looking deli. Suddenly my mom leans forward, putting one hand on the back of Tony's seat. "Turn this up," she says sharply. He adjusts a dial on the dashboard. The radio voice gets louder. "Following the recent outbreak in Waterbury, Connecticut." "God," my mother says. "Not another one." "All citizens, particularly those in the southeast quadrants, have been strongly encouraged to evacuate to temporary housing in neighboring Bethlehem." Bill Ardrey, chief of special forces, offered reassurances to worried citizens. "The situation is under control," he said during his 7-minute address. "State and municipal military personnel are working together to contain the disease and to ensure that the area is cordoned off, cleansed and sanitized as soon as possible. There is absolutely no reason to fear further contamination." "That's enough," my mother says abruptly, sitting back. "I can't listen anymore." Tony begins fiddling with the radio. Most stations are just static. Last month, the big story was the government's discovery of several wavelengths that had been co-opted by Invalids for their use. We were able to intercept and decode several critical messages, which led to a triumphant raid in Chicago and the arrest of several key Invalids. One of them was responsible for planning the explosion in Washington, D.C., last fall, a blast that killed 27 people, including a mother and a child. I was glad when the Invalids were executed. Some people complained that lethal injection was too humane for convicted terrorists, but I got it sent a powerful message: we are not the evil ones. We are reasonable and compassionate. We stand for fairness, structure, and organization. It's the other side, the uncureds, who bring the chaos. It's really disgusting, my mother says. If we'd started bombing when the trouble first, Tony, look out. Tony slams on the brakes. The tires screech. I go shooting forward, narrowly avoiding cracking my forehead on the headrest in front of me before my seat belt jerks me backward. There is a heavy thump. The air smells like burned rubber. "Shit," my mother is saying. "Shit. What in God's name?" "I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't see her. She came out from between the dumpsters." A young girl is standing in front of the car, her hands resting flat on the hood. Her hair is tinted around her thin, narrow face, and her eyes are huge and terrified. She looks vaguely familiar. Tony rolls down his window. The smell of the dumpsters, there are several of them, lined up next to one another, floats into the car, sweet and rotten. My mother coughs, and cups a palm over her nose. "You okay?" Tony calls out, craning his head out the window. The girl doesn't respond. She is panting, practically hyperventilating. Her eyes skate from Tony to my mother in the back seat, and then to me. A shock runs through me. Jenny. Lena's oldest cousin. I haven't seen her since last summer, and she's much thinner. She looks older too. But it's unmistakably her. I recognize the flare of her nostrils, her proud, pointed chin, and the eyes. She recognizes me too. I can tell. Before I can say anything, she wrenches her hands off the car hood and darts across the street. She's wearing an old, ink-stained backpack that I recognize as one of Lena's hand-me-downs. Across one of its pockets 2 names are colored in black bubble letters, Lena's and mine. We penned them onto her bag in 7th grade when we were bored in class. That's the day we first came up with our little code word, our pump you up cheer, which later we called out to each other at cross-country meets. "Hey Lena." A combination of both our names. For heaven's sake. You'd think the girl was old enough to know not to dart in front of traffic. She nearly gave me a heart attack. "I know her," I say automatically. I can't shake the image of Jenny's huge dark eyes, her pale skeleton face. "What do you mean, you know her?" My mother turns to me. I close my eyes and try to think of peaceful things. The bay. Seagulls wheeling against a blue sky. Rivers of spotless white fabric. But instead I see Jenny's eyes, the sharp angles of her cheek and chin. "Her name is Jenny," I say. "She's Lena's cousin." "Watch your mouth," my mom cuts me off sharply. I realize too late that I shouldn't have said anything. Lena's name is worse than a curse word in our family. For years, Mom was proud of my friendship with Lena. She saw it as a testament to her liberalism. "We don't judge the girl because of her family," she would tell guests when they brought it up. "The disease isn't genetic. That's an old idea." She took it as almost a personal insult when Lena contracted the disease and managed to escape before she could be treated, as though Lena had deliberately done it to make her look stupid. "All those years we let her into our house," she would say out of nowhere in the days following Lena's escape. "Even though we knew what the risks were. Everyone warned us." "Well, I guess we should have listened." "She looked thin," I say. "Home Tony." My mom leans her head against the headrest and closes her eyes, and I know the conversation is over. Lena. I wake in the middle of the night from a nightmare. In it, Grace was trapped beneath the floorboards in our old bedroom in Aunt Carol's house. There was shouting from downstairs, a fire. The room was full of smoke. I was trying to get to Grace to rescue her, but her hand kept slipping from my grasp. My eyes were burning, and the smoke was choking me, and I knew if I didn't run I would die. But she was crying and screaming for me to save her, save her. I sit up. I repeat Raven's mantra in my head: the past is dead, it doesn't exist, but it doesn't help. I can't shake the feeling of Grace's tiny hand, wet with sweat slipping from my grip. The tent is overcrowded. Danny is pressed up on one side of me, and there are 3 women curled up against her. Julian has his own tent for now. It is a small bit of courtesy. They are giving him time to adjust, as they did when I first escaped to the wilds. It takes time to get used to the feeling of closeness, and bodies constantly bumping yours. There is no privacy in the wilds, and there can be no modesty either. I could have joined Julian in his tent. I know that he expected me to, after what we shared underground, the kidnapping, the kiss. I brought him here, after all. I rescued him and pulled him into this new life, a life of freedom and feeling. There is nothing to stop me from sleeping next to him. The Kurds, the zombies, would say that we are already infected. We wallow in our filth, the way that pigs wallow in muck. Who knows? Maybe they're right. Maybe we are driven crazy by our feelings. Maybe love is a disease, and we would be better off without it. But we have chosen a different road. And in the end, that is the point of escaping the cure: we are free to choose. We are even free to choose the wrong thing. I won't be able to go back to sleep right away. I need air. I ease out from under the tangle of sleeping bags and blankets and fumble in the dark for the tent flap. I wriggle out of the tent on my stomach, trying not to make too much noise. Behind me, Danny kicks in her sleep and mutters something unintelligible. The night is cool. The sky is clear and cloudless. The moon looks closer than usual, and it paints everything with a silvery glow, like a fine layering of snow. I stand for a moment, relishing the feeling of stillness and quiet, the peaks of the tents touched with moonlight. The low-hanging branches just barely budding with new leaves. The occasional hooting of an owl in the distance. In one of the tents, Julian is sleeping. And in another, Alex. I move away from the tents. I head down toward the gully, past the remains of the campfire, which by now is nothing more than charred bits of blackened wood and a few smoking embers. The air still smells, faintly, like scorched metal and beans. I'm not sure where I'm going, and it's stupid to wander from camp. Raven has warned me a million times against it. At night the wilds belong to the animals, and it's easy to get turned around, lost among the growth, the slalom of trees. But I have an itch in my blood, and the night is so clear, I have no trouble navigating. I hop down into the dried-out riverbed, which is covered in a layer of rocks and leaves, and occasionally, a relic from the old life, a dented metal soda can, a plastic bag, a child's shoe. I walk south for a few hundred feet, where I'm prevented from going farther by an enormous, felled oak. Its trunk is so wide that horizontal it nearly reaches my chest. A vast network of roots arch up toward the sky like a dark pinwheel spray of water from a fountain. There's a rustling behind me. I whip around. A shadow shifts, turns solid, and for a second my heart stops. I'm not protected. I have no weapons, nothing to fend off a hungry animal. Then the shadow emerges into the open and takes the shape of a boy. In the moonlight it's impossible to tell that his hair is the exact color of leaves in the autumn, golden brown, and shot through with red. "Oh," Alex says. "It's you." These are the first words he has spoken to me in 4 days. There are 1,000 things I want to say to him. Please understand. Please forgive me. I prayed every day for you to be alive, until the hope became painful. Don't hate me. I still love you. But all that comes out is, I couldn't sleep. Alex must remember that I was always troubled by nightmares. We talked about it a lot during our summer together in Portland. Last summer, less than a year ago. It's impossible to imagine the vast distance I've covered since that time, the landscape that has formed between us. I couldn't sleep either, Alex says simply. Just this, the simple statement, and the fact that he is speaking to me at all, loosens something inside me. I want to hold him, to kiss him the way I used to. I thought you were dead, I say. It almost killed me. Did it? His voice is neutral. You made a pretty fast recovery. No. You don't understand. My throat is tight. I feel as though I'm being strangled. I couldn't keep hoping, and then waking up every day and finding out it wasn't true, and you were still gone. I wasn't strong enough. He is quiet for a second. It's too dark to see his expression. He is standing in shadow again, but I can sense that he is staring at me. Finally he says, when they took me to the crypts, I got they were going to kill me. They didn't even bother. They just left me to die. They threw me in a cell, and locked the door. Alex. The strangled feeling has moved from my throat to my chest, and without realizing it, I have begun to cry. I move toward him. I want to run my hands through his hair and kiss his forehead and each of his eyelids and take away the memory of what he has seen. But he steps backward out of reach. I didn't die. I don't know how. I should have. I'd lost plenty of blood. They were just as surprised as I was. After that it became a kind of game to see how much I could stand. To see how much they could do to me before I'd. He breaks off abruptly. I can't hear any more. Don't want to know. Don't want it to be true, can't stand to think of what they did to him there. I take another step forward and reach for his chest and shoulders in the dark. This time he doesn't push me away. But he doesn't embrace me either. He stands there cold, still, like a statue. Alex. I repeat his name like a prayer, like a magic spell that will make everything okay again. I run my hands up his chest, and to his chin. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Suddenly he jerks backward, simultaneously finding my wrists and pulling them down to my sides. There were days I would rather they have killed me. He doesn't drop my wrists. He squeezes them tightly, pinning my arms, keeping me immobilized. His voice is low, urgent, and so full of anger it pains me even more than his grip. There were days I asked for it, prayed for it when I went to sleep. The belief that I would see you again, that I could find you, the hope for it was the only thing that kept me going. He releases me and takes another step backward. So no. I don't understand. Alex, please. He balls his fists. Stop saying my name. You don't know me anymore. I do know you. I'm still crying, swallowing back spasms in my throat, struggling to breathe. This is a nightmare and I will wake up. This is a monster story, and he has come back to me, a terror creation, patched together, broken and hateful, and I will wake up and he will be here, and whole and mine again. I find his hands, lace my fingers through his even as he tries to pull away. It's me, Alex. Lena. You're Lena. Remember. Remember 37 Brooks, and the blanket we used to keep in the backyard. Don't, he says. His voice breaks on the word. And I always beat you in Scrabble, I say. I have to keep talking, and keep him here, and make him remember. Because you always let me win. And remember how we had a picnic one time, and the only thing we could find from the store was canned spaghetti, and some green beans. And you said to mix them. Don't. And we did, and it wasn't bad. We ate the whole stupid can, we were so hungry. And when it started to get dark you pointed to the sky, and told me there was a star for everything you loved about me. I'm gasping, feeling as though I am about to drown. I'm reaching for him blindly, grabbing at his collar. Stop. He grabs my shoulders. His face is an inch from mine but unrecognizable, a gross, contorted mask. Just stop. No more. It's done, okay. That's all done now. Alex, please. Stop. His voice rings out sharply, hard as a slap. He releases me, and I stumble backward. Alex is dead, do you hear me? All of that, what we felt, what it meant, that's done now, okay. Buried. Blown away. Alex. He has started to turn away. Now he whirls around. The moon lights him stark white and furious, a camera image two-dimensional, gripped by the flash. I don't love you, Lena. Do you hear me? I never loved you. The air goes. Everything goes. I don't believe you. I'm crying so hard, I can hardly speak. He takes one step toward me. And now I don't recognize him at all. He has transformed entirely, turned into a stranger. It was a lie. Okay. It was all a lie. Craziness like they always said. Just forget about it. Forget it ever happened. Please. I don't know how I stay on my feet, why I don't shatter into dust right there, why my heart keeps beating when I want it so badly to stop. Please don't do this, Alex. Stop saying my name. Then we both hear it, the crack and rustle of leaves behind us, the sound of something large moving through the woods. Alex's expression changes. The anger drops away, and is replaced by something else, a frozen tenseness, like a deer just before it startles. Don't move, Lena, he says quietly, but his words are laced with urgency. Even before I turn around, I can feel the looming shape behind me, the snuffle of animal breath, the hunger craving, impersonal. A bear. It has picked its way into the gully and is now no more than 4 feet away from us. It is a black bear, its matted fur streaked silver in the moonlight and big, 5 or 6 feet long and, even on all 4 legs, almost as high as my shoulder. It looks from Alex to me and back to Alex. Its eyes are just like pieces of carved onyx, dull, lifeless. Two things strike me at once: the bear is skinny, starving. The winter has been hard. Also, it is not afraid of us. A jolt of fear shocks through me, shorting out the pain, shorting out all other thoughts besides one: I should have brought a gun. The bear takes another step forward, swinging its massive head back and forth, evaluating us. I can see its brag steaming in the cold air, its peaked shoulder blades high and sharp. "All right," Alex says in that same low voice. He's standing behind me, and I can feel the tension in his body, ramrod straight, petrified. "Let's take it easy. Real slow. We're going to back away, all right. Nice and slowly." He takes a single step backward, and just that little movement makes the bear tense up in a crouch, baring its teeth, which glisten bone white in the moonlight. Alex freezes again. The bear begins to growl. It is so close that I can feel the heat from its massive body, smell the sourness of its starving breath. I should have brought a gun. No way to turn and run. That makes us prey, and the bear is looking for prey. Stupid. That is the rule of the wilds: you must be bigger, and stronger and tougher. You must hurt, or be hurt. The bear swings forward another step, still growling. Every muscle in my body is an alarm, screaming at me to run, but I stay rooted in place, forcing myself not to move, not to twitch. The bear hesitates. I won't run. So maybe not prey, then. It pulls back an inch, an advantage, a tiny concession. I take it. Hey. I bark as loud as I can and bring my arms above my head, trying to make myself look as large as possible. Hey. Get out of here. Go on. Go. The bear withdraws another inch, confused, startled. I said go. I reach out and strike against the nearest tree with my foot, sending a spray of bark in the bear's direction. As the bear still hesitates, uncertain but not growling, now on the defensive, confused, I drop down into a crouch and scoop up the first rock I can get my fist around, and then I'm up and chucking it hard. It connects just below the bear's left shoulder with a heavy thud. The bear shuffles backward, whimpering. Then it turns and bounds off into the woods, a fast black blur. Holy shit, Alex bursts out behind me. He exhales long and loud, bends over, straightens up again. Holy shit. The adrenaline, the release of tension, has made him forget. For a second, the new mask is dropped, and a glimpse of the old Alex is revealed. I feel a brief surge of nausea. I keep thinking of the bear's wounded, desperate eyes, and the heavy thud of the rock against its shoulder. But I had no choice. It is the rule of the wilds. That was crazy. You're crazy. Alex shakes his head. The old Lena would have bolted. You must be bigger, and stronger, and tougher. A coldness radiates through me, a solid wall that is growing, piece by piece, in my chest. He doesn't love me. He never loved me. It was all a lie. The old Lena is dead, I say, and then push past him, back down through the gully toward the camp. Each step is more difficult than the last. The heaviness fills me and turns my limbs to stone. You must hurt, or be hurt. Alex doesn't follow me, and I don't expect him to. I don't care where he goes, whether he stays in the woods all night, whether he never returns to camp. As he said, all of that, the caring is done now. It's not until I've almost reached the tents that I begin crying again. The tears come all at once, and I have to stop walking and double up into a crouch. I want to bleed all the feelings out of me. For a second I think about how easy it would be to pass back to the other side, to walk straight into the laboratories and offer myself up to the surgeons. You were right. I was wrong. Get it out. Lena. I look up. Julian has emerged from his tent. I must have woken him. His hair is sticking up at crazy angles, like the broken spokes of a wheel, and his feet are bare. I straighten up, swiping my nose on the sleeve of my sweatshirt. I'm okay, I say, still hiccuping back tears. I'm fine. For a minute he stands there looking at me, and I can tell that he knows why I'm crying, and he understands, and it's going to be all right. He opens his arms to me. Come here, he says quietly. I can't move to him fast enough. I practically fall into him. He catches me and pulls me in tightly to his chest, and I let myself go again, let sobs run through me. He stands there with me and murmurs into my hair and kisses the top of my head and lets me cry over losing another boy, a boy I loved better. I'm sorry, I say over and over into his chest. I'm sorry. His shirt smells like smoke from the fire, like mulch and spring growth. It's okay, he whispers back. When I've calmed down a little, Julian takes my hand. I follow him into the dark cave of his tent, which smells like his shirt but even more so. I lie down on top of his sleeping bag, and he lies down beside me, making a perfect seashell arc for my body. I curl up in this space, safe, warm, and let the last tears I will ever cry for Alex flow hot over my cheeks, and down into the ground and away. Hana. Hana. My mother is looking at me expectantly. Fred asked you to pass the green beans. Sorry, I say, forcing a smile. Last night, I hardly slept. I even had little snatches of dream bare wisps of image that skittered away before I could focus on them. I reach for the glazed ceramic dish like everything in the Hargrove house. It is beautiful even though Fred is more than capable of reaching it himself. This is part of the ritual. Soon I will be his wife, and we will sit like this every night, performing a well-choreographed dance. Fred smiles at me. Tired. He says. In the past few months, we have spent many hours together. Our Sunday dinner is just one of the many ways we have begun practicing merging our lives. I've spent a long time scrutinizing his features, trying to figure out whether he is attractive, and in the end I have come up with this: he is very pleasant to look at. He is not as attractive as I am, but he is smarter, and I like his dark hair, and the way it falls over his right eyebrow when he has not had time to smooth it back. She looks tired, Mrs. Hargrove says. Fred's mother often talks about me as though I'm not in the room. I don't take it personally. She does it with everybody. Fred's father was mayor for more than 3 terms. Now that Mr. Hargrove is dead, Fred has been groomed to take his place. Since the incidents in January, Fred campaigned tirelessly for nomination and appointment, and it paid off. Only a week ago, a special interim committee appointed him the new mayor. He will be inaugurated publicly early next week. Mrs. Hargrove is used to being the most important woman in the room. I'm fine, I say. Lena always said that I could lie my way out of hell. The truth is, I'm not fine. I'm worried that I can't stop worrying about Jenny and how thin she looked. I'm worried that I've been thinking of Lena again. Of course, the wedding preparations are very stressful, my mother says. My father grunts. You're not the one writing the checks. This makes everybody laugh. The room is suddenly illuminated by a brief flash of light from outside. A journalist, parked in the bushes directly outside the window, is snapping our picture, which will then be sold to local newspapers and TV stations. Mrs. Hargrove has arranged for paparazzi to be here tonight. She tipped the photographers off to the location of a dinner that Fred arranged for us on New Year's Eve. Photo opportunities are arranged and carefully plotted, so the public can watch our emerging story and see the happiness we've achieved by being paired so perfectly together. And I am happy with Fred. We get along very well. We like the same things. We have a lot to talk about. That's why I'm worried everything will go up in smoke if the procedure has not worked correctly. I heard on the radio that they've evacuated parts of Waterbury, Fred says. Parts of San Francisco, too. Riots broke out over the weekend. Please, Fred, Mrs. Hargrove says. Do we really have to talk about this at dinner? It won't help to ignore it, Fred says, turning to her. That's what Dad did. And look what happened. Fred. Mrs. Hargrove's voice is strained, but she manages to keep smiling. Click. Just for a second, the dining room walls are lit up by the camera's flash. It really isn't the time. We can't pretend anymore. Fred looks around the table as though appealing to each of us. I drop my eyes. The resistance exists. It may even be growing. An epidemic, that's what this is. They've cordoned off most of Waterbury, my mother says. I'm sure they'll do the same in San Francisco. Fred shakes his head. This isn't just about the infected. That's the problem. There's a whole system of sympathizers and network of support. I won't do what Dad did, he says with sudden fierceness. Mrs. Hargrove has gone very still. For years there were rumors that the Invalids still existed, that their numbers were growing, even. You know it. Dad knew it. But he refused to believe. I keep my head bent over my plate. A piece of lamb is sitting untouched next to green beans and fresh mint jelly. Only the best for the Hargroves. I pray that the journalists outside don't take a picture now. I'm sure my face is red. Everyone at the table knows that my former best friend tried to run off with an invalid, and they know or suspect that I covered for her. Fred's voice gets quieter. By the time he accepted it, by the time he was willing to act, it was too late. He reaches out to touch his mother's hand, but she picks up her fork and begins eating again, stabbing green beans with such force the tines of her fork make a sharp, clanging noise against the plate. Fred clears his throat. Well, I refuse to look the other way, he says. It's time we all face this head on. I just don't see why we have to talk about it at dinner, Mrs. Hargrove says. When we're having a perfectly nice time. May I be excused? I ask too sharply. Everyone at the table turns to me in surprise. Click. I can only imagine what that picture will look like, my mother's mouth frozen in a perfect O, Mrs. Hargrove frowning. My father lifting a bloody piece of lamb to his lips. What do you mean excused? My mother says. See. Mrs. Hargrove sighs and shakes her head at Fred. You've made Hana unhappy. No, no. It's not that. It's just. You were right. I'm not feeling well, I say. I ball my napkin on the table and then, seeing my mother's look, fold it, and drape it next to my plate. I have a headache. I hope you're not coming down with something, Mrs. Hargrove says. You can't be sick for the inauguration. She won't be sick, my mother says quickly. I won't be sick, I parrot. I don't know exactly what's wrong with me, but little points of pain are exploding in my head. I just need to lie down, I think. I'll call Tony. My mom pushes away from the table. No, please. More than anything, I want to be left alone. In the past month, since my mother and Mrs. Hargrove determined that the wedding needed to be fast-tracked to correspond with Fred's ascension to mayor, it seems the only time I can be alone is when I go to the bathroom. I don't mind walking. This provokes a miniature eruption. All of a sudden, everyone is speaking at once. My father is saying out of the question, and my mother says, imagine how that would look. Fred leans toward me. It isn't safe right now, Hana, and Mrs. Hargrove says, you must have a fever. In the end, my parents decide that Tony will drive me home and return for them later. This is a decent compromise. At least it means I'll have the house to myself for a bit. I stand up and bring my plate to the kitchen, despite Mrs. Hargrove's insistence that the housekeeper be allowed to do it. I scrape food into the trash and flash back to the smell of the dumpsters yesterday, the way that Jenny materialized from between them. I hope the conversation didn't upset you. I turn around. Fred has followed me into the kitchen. He leaves a respectful distance between us. It didn't, I say. I'm too tired to reassure him further. I just want to go home. You don't have a fever, do you? Fred looks at me steadily. You look pale. I'm just tired, I say. Good. Fred puts his hands in his pockets, dark, creased in front like my father's. I was worried I'd gotten a defective one. I shake my head, sure that I've misheard him. What? I'm kidding. Fred smiles. He has a dimple in his left cheek and very nice teeth. I appreciate that about him. I'll see you soon. He leans forward and kisses my cheek. I draw back involuntarily. I'm still not used to being touched by him. Go get your beauty sleep. I will, I say, but he's already pushing out of the kitchen and returning to the dining room where soon dessert and coffee will be served. In 3 weeks, he will be my husband, and this will be my kitchen, and the housekeeper will be mine too. Mrs. Hargrove will have to listen to me, and I will choose what we eat every day, and there will be nothing left to want. Unless Fred is right. Unless I am a defective one. Lena. The argument continues where to go, whether to split up. Some members of the group want to loop south again, and then east to Waterbury, where there are rumors of a successful resistance movement and a large camp of invalids flourishing in safety. Some want to head all the way out to Cape Cod, which is practically unpopulated and will therefore be a safer place to camp out. A few of us Gordo, in particular, want to continue north and try to make a break across the U.S. border and into Canada. In school we were always taught that other countries' places without the cure had been ravaged by the disease and turned into wastelands. But this, like most other things we were taught, was no doubt a lie. Gordo has heard stories from trappers and drifters about Canada, and he makes it sound like Eden in the book of SHHH. I say Cape Cod, Pike says. He has white blonde hair, ruthlessly trimmed down to the scalp. If the bombing begins again, we won't be safe anywhere, Tack interrupts him. Pike and Tack are constantly butting heads. We're safer the farther we are from a city, Pike argues. If the resistance turns into a full-on rebellion, we can expect swift and immediate reprisals from the government. We'll have more time. To what? Swim across the ocean. Tack shakes his head. He is squatting next to Raven, who is repairing one of our traps. It's amazing how happy she looks here, sitting in the dirt after a long day of hiking and trapping, happier than she did when we lived together in Brooklyn, posing as Kurds in our nice apartment with shiny edges and polished hard surfaces. There, she was like one of the women we studied in history class who laced themselves up in corsets until they could barely breathe or speak, white-faced, stifled. Look, we can't outrun this. We might as well join forces, build our numbers as best we can. Tack catches my eye across the campfire. I smile at him. I don't know how much Tack and Raven have deciphered about what has happened between Alex and me, and what our history is. They've said nothing to me about it, but they have been nicer to me than usual. I'm with Tack, Hunter says. He tosses a bullet into the air, catches it on the back of his hand, then flips it into his palm. We could split up, Raven suggests for the 100th time. It's obvious she doesn't like Pike, or Danny either. In this new group, the lines of dominance haven't been so clearly drawn, and what Tack and Raven say doesn't automatically pass for gospel. We're not splitting up, Tack says firmly. But immediately he takes the trap from her and says, let me help you. This is how Tack and Raven work. It's their private language of push and return, argument and concession. With the cure, relationships are all the same, and rules and expectations are defined. Without the cure, relationships must be reinvented every day, languages constantly decoded and deciphered. Freedom is exhausting. What do you think, Lena? Raven asks, and Pike, Danny, and the others swivel around to look at me. Now that I've proven myself to the resistance, my opinion carries weight. From the shadows, I can sense Alex looking at me too. Cape Cod, I say, feeding more kindling into the fire. The farther we are from the cities, the better, and any advantage is better than none. It's not like we'll be alone. There will be other homesteaders there, other groups to join with. My voice rings out loudly in the clearing. I wonder if Alex has noticed this change. I have gotten louder and more confident. There's a moment of quiet. Raven looks at me thoughtfully. Then abruptly, she turns and shoots a glance over her shoulder. What about you, Alex? Waterbury, he answers immediately. My stomach knots up. I know it's stupid, I know the stakes are higher than the two of us, but I can't help but feel a flash of anger. Of course he disagrees with me. Of course. It's no advantage to be cut off from communication and information, he says. There's a war on. We can try to deny it, we can try to bury our heads in the sand, but that's the truth. And the war will find us either way eventually. I say we meet it head on. He's right, Julian pipes up. I turn to him startled. He hardly ever speaks in the evenings around the campfire. I don't think he feels comfortable yet. He is still the newbie, the outsider, and even worse, a convert from the other side. Julian Feynman, son of the late Thomas Feynman, founder and head of Deliria Free America and enemy to everything we stand for. It doesn't matter that Julian turned his back on his family and cause and nearly gave up his life to be here with us. I can tell that some people don't trust him. Julian speaks with the measured cadence of a practiced public speaker. There's no point in using avoidance tactics. This won't blow over. If the resistance grows, the government and the military will do anything they can to stop it. We'll have a better chance of fighting back if we put ourselves in the middle of things. Otherwise we'll just be rabbits in a hole, waiting to be flushed out. Even though Julian agrees with Alex, he is careful to keep his eyes trained on Raven. Julian and Alex never speak to or even look at each other, and the others are careful not to comment on it. I say Waterbury, Lou puts in, which surprises me. Last year, she didn't want anything to do with the resistance. She wanted to disappear into the wilds, make a homestead as far as possible from the valid cities. All right, then. Raven stands up, brushing off the back of her jeans. Waterbury it is. Any other objections? We're all silent for a minute, looking at one another, our faces consumed by shadow. No one speaks. I'm not happy with the decision, and Julian must sense it. He puts a hand on my knee and squeezes. Then it's decided. Tomorrow we can. Raven is cut off by the sound of shouting, a sudden flurry of voices. We all rise in instinctive response. What the hell? Tak has shouldered his rifle and is scanning the massive trees that surround us, a tangled wall of branches and vines. The woods have fallen silent again. SHHH. Raven holds up a hand. Then, I need help out here, guys. And then shit. There is a collective release, a relaxation of tension. We recognize Sparrow's voice. He wandered away earlier to do his business in the woods. We got you, Sparrow. Pike calls out. Pike calls out. Figures race into the trees, turning to shadow as soon as they leave the small circumference of brightness cast by the fire. Julian and I stay where we are, and I notice that Alex does too. There is a confusion of voices and instructions. Her legs, grab her legs, and then Sparrow, Tak, Pike and Danny are emerging once again into the clearing, each pair saddled with a body. At first I think they are each hauling an animal bundled in tarps, but then I see a pale white arm, dangling toward the ground, starkly illuminated by the fire, and my stomach turns. People. Water, get water. Grab the kit, Raven, she's bleeding. For a moment, I'm paralyzed. As Tak and Pike place the bodies down on the ground, near the fire, two faces are revealed, one old, dark, weather-beaten. A woman who has been in the wilds for most of her life, if not all of it. Saliva is bubbling at the corners of her mouth, and her breathing is hoarse and full of fluid. The other face is unexpectedly lovely. She must be my age or even a little younger. Her skin is the color of the inside of an almond, and her long, dark brown hair is fanned out behind her in the dirt. For a moment I am jettisoned back to my own escape to the wilds. Raven and Tak must have found me exactly this way, more dead than not, beaten and bruised. Tak swivels around and catches me staring. A little help, Lena, he says sharply. His voice snaps me out of my trance. I go and kneel beside him, next to the older woman. Raven, Pike and Danny are taking care of the girl. Julian hovers behind me. What can I do? He asks. We need clean water, Tak says without looking up. He has his knife out and is cutting away her shirt. In places it seems almost melded with her skin, and then I see, horrified, that her lower half is badly burned and her legs covered with open sores and infection. I have to close my eyes for a second and will myself not to be sick. Julian brushes my shoulder once with his hand, then goes off in search of the water. Shit, Tak mutters as he uncovers yet another wound. This one a long, ragged cut along her shin, deep and welling with infection. Shit. The woman lets out a gurgled moan and then falls silent. Don't tap out on me now, he says. He whips off his windbreaker. Sweat glistens on his forehead. We are close to the fire, which the others are stoking higher. I need a kit. Tak grabs a hand towel and begins ripping it into strips, expertly and quickly. These will be tourniquets. Someone get me a damn kit. The heat is a wall next to us. The dark smoke blots out the sky. It weaves its way into my guts too, distorting my impressions, which begin to take on the quality of dream: the voices, the movement, the heat, and the smell of bodies, all fractured and senseless. I can't tell whether I am kneeling there for minutes or hours. At some point Julian returns carrying a bucket of steaming water. Then he leaves and returns again. I am helping to clean the woman's wounds, and after a time I stop seeing her body as skin and flesh, but as something twisted and warped and weird, like the dark pieces of petrified wood we turn up in the forest. Tak tells me what to do and I do it. More water, cold this time. Clean cloth. I stand, move, take the objects that are given to me and return with them. More minutes pass. More hours. At some point I look up and it is not Tak next to me, but Alex. He is sewing up a cut on the woman's shoulder, using a regular sewing needle and long dark thread. He is pale with concentration, but he moves fluidly and quickly. He has obviously had practice. It occurs to me that there is so much I never knew about him: his past, his role in the resistance, what his life was like in the wilds before he came to Portland, and I feel a flash of grief so intense it almost makes me cry out, not for what I lost, but for the chances I missed. Our elbows touch. He draws away. The smoke is coating my throat now, making it difficult to swallow. The air smells like ash. I continue cleaning the woman's wooden legs and body, the way I used to help my aunt polish the mahogany table once a month, carefully and slowly. Then Alex is gone, and Tak is next to me again. He puts his hands on my shoulders and draws me gently backward. It's okay, he's saying. Leave it. It's all right. She doesn't need you anymore. For a second I think, we did it, she's safe now. But then as Tak pilots me toward the tents, I see her face lit up in the glow of the fire, white, waxen, eyes open and staring blindly at the sky, and I know that she's dead, and everything we did was for nothing. Raven is still kneeling by the younger girl's side, but her ministrations are less frantic now, and I can hear that the girl is breathing regularly. Julian is already in the tent. I'm so tired, I feel as though I'm sleepwalking. He moves over and makes a space for me, and I practically collapse into him, into that little question mark formed by his body. My hair reeks of smoke. Are you okay? Julian whispers, finding my hand in the dark. Fine, I whisper back. Is she okay? Dead, I say shortly. Julian sucks in a breath, and I feel his body stiffen behind me. I'm sorry, Lena. You can't save them all, I say. That's not how it works. That is what Tak would say, and I know it's true even if, deep down, I still don't quite believe it. Julian squeezes me, and kisses the back of my head, and then I let myself tunnel down into sleep, and away from the smell of burning.